Hey, so this is Julie. I'm 24 and okay, it still kind of blows my mind that I own my house outright. No mortgage, no banks, just me. Sounds amazing, right? But, well, it didn't exactly come without drama. My success didn't sit well with my own family, yeah. Even the people who were supposed to have my back, my sister and parents, let's just say things got messy. Anyway, before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always wild to see how far these stories travel. Growing up, our house was, well, it was always kind of heavy. You know, there was this constant hum of stress, the kind that never really goes away. My dad, David, worked insane hours at the warehouse. I mean, long, grueling shifts, the kind that leave you drained the second you step through the door. And my mom, Karen, she was home all day, stretching every dollar until it practically screamed. They weren't bad people, not at all, but you could see how life had worn them down. Their dreams weren't big anymore. They'd been ground down to just getting by, scraping through each month without losing it completely. And then there was my sister, Jessica. Oh man, she was the dreamer in the family, the one everyone put on a pedestal, pretty, charming, effortlessly confident. And she had this whole vision of a life that was light years away from our reality. She sketched dresses, practiced makeup routines for hours, and endlessly talked about how she'd be discovered, whisked away from our dull little suburban life. Every school play she was in, every compliment from a stranger, it was like fuel for her. And my parents, they ate it up. I swear, every smile or nod she got was proof that she was destined for glamour. She was treated like the family lottery ticket, the one everyone pinned their hopes on. Meanwhile, me, I was sort of on the sidelines, quiet, practical, always observing. I wasn't in a rush to be noticed. While Jessica was dreaming of runways and red carpets, I was noticing the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, hearing the whispers of arguments over car repairs, the hushed talks about whether groceries would stretch. Destiny wasn't going to swoop in and pay the mortgage. Life didn't hand out fairy tale endings. So I figured I'd better do something for myself, even if it was behind the scenes. I had this sense that I couldn't rely on luck or talent alone. My path wasn't about being discovered. It was about building something slowly, brick by brick. I think that's when I started noticing patterns, systems. While my friends were all about selfies and posting their weekend vibes, I was fascinated by how social media actually worked. Like, how a post could reach thousands, how small businesses could grow followers. Influence, it was like a puzzle I needed to solve. I wanted to figure out how to turn that into something real, something I could control. And honestly, it was kind of thrilling. Unlike Jessica's fantasy world, this was tangible. This was a skill I could practice, a challenge I could tackle. Looking back, it wasn't just about fascination, it was survival in a way. I could see how easily things could go wrong, how fragile financial stability was, watching my parents constantly on edge, trying not to fall behind. Made me realize I needed my own lifeboat. I couldn't rely on anyone else to rescue me, and maybe, somewhere deep down, I also wanted to prove something, not to anyone in particular, maybe just to myself, that I could rise above this, that I could take control. There was also this contrast that stuck with me. Jessica, adored, coddled, always praised. walking through life with this sense of inevitable success, and then me, quiet, unnoticed, yet watching everything, learning. It might have looked like I was fading into the background, but really, I was paying attention. Every unpaid bill, every tense conversation, every little thing that showed how life wasn't easy for our family, it all added up. And while Jessica's world was sparkling and light, I was studying the shadows, the cracks, and thinking, okay, how do I navigate this? How do I make something real for myself that isn't dependent on being chosen or lucky? And here's the thing, it wasn't about being resentful. I didn't begrudge Jessica for her charm or her dreams. I just knew my reality was different. I couldn't live on compliments or vicarious hope. I needed to build, to plan, to secure a life that made sense for me. That quiet observation, that attentiveness, it became this driving force. It shaped how I approached problems, how I thought about opportunities. I was learning early that the world didn't owe me anything. And if I wanted a future that felt safe and real, I had to create it myself. So, yeah, our household was tense, often frustrating, and exhausting in its own way. But it was also a kind of classroom. I learned the value of money, the fragility of security, and the importance of perseverance. Watching Jessica shine in the way she did, seeing my parents' exhaustion, noticing the details everyone else overlooked, it set me up in a way I couldn't have known at the time. It planted the seed of determination, the kind that sticks with you, that quietly tells you, no matter what, you're going to make your own way. That was me, the observer, the quiet one, learning, absorbing, getting ready to build my future while the rest of the world was focused somewhere else. So, around the time I turned 19, something clicked. I'd been obsessed with social media for years, not in the way most teenagers are. Just scrolling mindlessly, but really dissecting it. Like, I was fascinated by how a single post could reach thousands of people, how a small business could grow a following, or how influence could actually be, well, manufactured. It was like a puzzle, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. While everyone else was posting selfies or memes, I was plotting strategies, learning algorithms, reading blogs, watching tutorials for hours at night. I was obsessed. And then I made a choice. I decided I wasn't going back to that part-time job at the local diner. Nope. I took the $1,500 I'd painstakingly saved, which was basically my life's work at that point, and I officially registered my own business. I called it Amplify Digital. Just saying the name out loud now still gives me goosebumps. But back then, it felt like holding a tiny, fragile spark that I hoped could grow into a bonfire. I was nervous, of course, terrified, but also excited. When I told my parents, it didn't exactly go as planned. My dad raised his brow, confusion written all over his face. "Honey, why don't you focus on your studies or get a real job with a pension?" he asked. A pension, I mean. I almost laughed. And my mom, bless her heart, sounded worried. "A business on the computer. Julie, are you sure this is practical? Practical?" Right. But honestly, it was my passion. And then there was Jessica. "Oh, Jessica." She laughed. Not a small, polite giggle, but the kind that cuts through you. "Oh, Julie, that's cute," she said, scrolling through her phone. "Let me know when your little computer game makes you a millionaire." That throwaway comment. Yeah, It lit a fire under me. The first 2 years were brutal. I was a full-time college student during the day and a one-woman marketing agency at night. My office, the corner of my bedroom, my desk was basically a hand-me-down table. My chair was from the thrift store, and my laptop was secondhand, patched together with duct tape and hope. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I sent hundreds of cold emails to small businesses, offering my services for next to nothing just to get my foot in the door. Most of them didn't reply. Some replied with skepticism so thick I could practically cut it with a knife. "You're 19, they'd ask. And I'd nod, trying to look confident while my stomach did somersaults. I learned fast how to fake confidence, tossing around industry jargon I'd just learned from blogs and YouTube tutorials hours before the call. It felt ridiculous, but it worked. My very first client was a small, local bakery struggling to get foot traffic. I charged them a whopping $200 a month. I set up their social media profiles, ran small targeted ads, and organized a free cupcake giveaway that went kind of viral in our town. Within 3 months, they had lines out the door every weekend and had to hire 2 new staff members. And the best part, they tearfully told me I'd saved their business. That feeling, oh my God, it was more addictive than any caffeine I'd ever had. I printed their thank you email and taped it above my desk. I mean, my first brick. That was the moment it clicked I was building something real, something mine. Words started to spread slowly, then all at once. The bakery owner recommended me to a friend who owned a boutique. That boutique owner sent me to a local real estate agent. And just like that, my client list started to grow. By the time I turned 21, I was earning more than my dad. I was still living at home, still quietly paying for things here and there, groceries for my mom, internet and electricity bills, even replacing the dishwasher my parents had been complaining about for a year. And they accepted it, sort of, but never fully acknowledged the source. In their eyes, I was still just playing on the computer. Meanwhile, Jessica, now 23, was working part-time as a waitress and spending the rest of her time chasing her influencer dreams, which mostly involved taking photos in expensive clothes she would eventually return. Her career wasn't really taking off, but that didn't matter. My success was the inconvenient truth she and my parents preferred to ignore. And honestly, it was weird. It felt like my hard work, the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the constant juggling of college and clients, was being overlooked in favor of some narrative that made it easier for them to accept. It wasn't just about the money, though. There was a strange satisfaction in those small victories, the tangible proof that I could actually make a difference for someone. I remember the late nights sitting on the floor of my bedroom, my laptop balanced on my knees, feeling utterly exhausted, and then getting a text from a client that just said, "You've changed our lives." It's wild how powerful that was. It kept me going when the doubts crept in, when Jessica's sneers lingered in my head, when my parents looked at me like I was some kid playing a game rather than building a career. I learned so many lessons fast. I learned that patience was a superpower, that cold emails can feel like throwing messages into a black hole. But eventually, someone hears you. I learned that confidence, even faked, opens doors that talent alone can't. I learned that the real reward wasn't just money, it was creating something that mattered, something that had impact, and maybe most importantly, I learned that your path doesn't have to match anyone else's. Jessica had her dreams, I had mine, and they looked nothing alike. By the end of those first few years, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I was still learning, still making mistakes, still living on caffeine and cheap noodles. But there was a rhythm, a flow. I could feel the foundation of my agency taking shape. Every client, every project, every little victory was another brick in the structure I was building for myself. And somewhere in the background, that fire Jessica had accidentally lit, it was still burning, driving me to push harder, aim higher, prove that this little computer game I'd started could turn into something extraordinary. Looking back now, it's funny to think about how naive I was. I thought success would be proof enough, that results would speak for themselves. But I quickly learned that sometimes the world, including your own family, doesn't always see what you see. And, well, that's a story for later. But this was the beginning, the part where a quiet, determined 19-year-old girl started to carve out her own life. One client, one victory, one sleepless night at a time. By the time I hit 21, things had changed a lot, but still in quiet, almost invisible ways. My business, Amplify Digital, was growing faster than I'd ever imagined. I was picking up clients left and right, the kind of clients that actually paid more than my parents ever dreamed I could earn. And here's the weird part, I was still living at home, still slipping quietly into the role of financial helper without making a scene. I'd cover the grocery bills, chip in on the internet and electricity, even replace that broken dishwasher they'd been grumbling about for ages. I wasn't asking for thanks. I was just doing it because it made sense. Because I could. Meanwhile, Jessica, she was still chasing that influencer dream. She'd spend hours taking photos, trying to look effortlessly glamorous, posting to her accounts that barely moved the needle. It was almost comical if it wasn't so frustrating. She'd talk about brands and opportunities like they were already hers, like the universe owed her the spotlight. But the reality, it wasn't matching the fantasy. Followers barely growing, engagement flatlining. And yet, she acted like she was on the verge of stardom. And that's when it hit me her failure wasn't just about social media metrics, it was about perspective. While I was quietly building security, she was spinning her wheels, still waiting for luck to hand her everything on a silver platter. I think that's when the tension really started to bubble under the surface. My parents, they'd accept the help, but never fully acknowledge where it came from. Their subtle glances, the way they'd mutter a thanks that barely reached their eyes. It was strange. I'd just cleared their debts, paid off their mortgage, and yet the response wasn't what I expected. My dad stared at the paid-in-full letters like they were written in another language. My mom picked them up, set them down, picked them up again, like she was trying to understand a puzzle that made no sense. And Jessica, she was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, letting out this short, sharp scoff. "So, you're rich now. Must be nice," she said, like it was a jab instead of what it actually was, relief. Security, a chance for all of us to breathe. "It's not about being rich, Jess," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's about being secure, for all of us." But that didn't land. My dad folded the letters and placed them neatly on the coffee table. His voice, low and cold. "We didn't ask you to do this," he said. And just like that, the moment I thought would be joyful, the moment where I imagined hugs and tears of relief, turned flat, hollow, and strange. It was like my gesture had become a spotlight on their own perceived failures. There was no gratitude, only awkward silence. And yeah, I felt a pang of hurt, but underneath it, there was also this sense of freedom. Finally, I could breathe. Finally, I could start thinking about my own future. Over the next couple of years, my agency really took off. I hired staff, started working with more national clients, and I began to feel the shift from being a solo hustler to a CEO, someone who made decisions that impacted a whole team. It was empowering, exhilarating, terrifying, all at once. By 24, my savings account had a number that my 19-year-old self would have thought was a typo. And that's when I started thinking about a place of my own, not renting, not temporary, but a home that belonged to me, a symbol of everything I'd built with my own hands, my own brain, my own sleepless nights. I found a house in a quiet, established neighborhood about 20 minutes from my parents' place. Not a mansion, just a charming 1960s ranch-style home with a big backyard and a beautiful oak tree. It needed updates, sure, but it was solid. And because I had no debt, because I had a real, secure income, I did something I'd only dreamed of. I bought it in cash. No mortgage, no loans, just a clean transfer of funds. The day I got the keys, I was giddy. I drove over to my parents' house, keys in hand, and announced, I bought a house, expecting, I don't know, a little celebration. My mom barely looked up from the TV. Where is it? She asked flatly. My dad remained muted. And Jessica, of course, was listening from her room, and that was the first little spark of the friction that would grow later. I suggested gently that now that they had no mortgage and the house was aging, maybe they could consider selling, downsizing, and I'd help them with it. That got their attention. My dad muted the TV. My mom's tone sharpened. Jessica shrieked from her room. I can't believe you, she yelled, face red with anger. You finally get a little money and now you want to kick us all out. You want to get rid of us. I was taken aback. I tried to explain I was just trying to help, just trying to make things better for all of us. But by then, the atmosphere was thick with resentment. It wasn't about me buying a house anymore. It was about my success, about what it represented. And suddenly, my gestures of support, the bills I paid, the dishwasher, the mortgage, they were no longer simple acts of care. They were seen as evidence of entitlement, of my audacity to be independent, to thrive, to create my own security. The next few months in my new house were surreal, blissful peace. Yes, but the silence from my family was deafening. Calls were met with clipped answers, invitations politely deflected with excuses, even at family gatherings. The tension was palpable. My family clustered tightly together, speaking to me only when necessary. And Jessica, of course, would make little muttered comments just loud enough to be heard. Some of us actually have to work for a living. The irony of it sometimes made me want to laugh, but mostly, it just stung. And yet, despite all this, I felt a strange sense of triumph. I was building my life on my terms. I was financially independent, growing my business, paying off debts that had been weighing us down, and slowly carving out a space that was entirely mine. But it was bittersweet. The very success I had worked for, that had allowed me to help my family, was also what created the cracks in our relationships. Their resentment, subtle or otherwise, was growing. And I was starting to understand that sometimes success isn't just about what you achieve. Sometimes it's about how others react when you surpass them. And that reaction, well, it wasn't always pretty. Buying my first home outright, it was surreal. No mortgage, no banks breathing down my neck. Just a clean, solid piece of my own life. The house wasn't a mansion, just a cozy 1960s ranch style with a big backyard and this beautiful old oak tree that made the place feel alive. I was giddy, honestly, holding the brass keys in my hand, imagining what it would feel like to have a space that was truly mine. And then, of course, I thought about my family. I wanted them to benefit too. The house was my milestone, my security, but I figured maybe this could help them as well. So, I drove over to my parents' house, full of excitement, ready to share the news. I walked into the living room and announced, I bought a house, expecting maybe a smile, a hug, a little celebration, but the reaction flat. My mom didn't even look up from the TV. Where is it? She asked, as if it was just another random detail. My dad stayed quiet, and Jessica was lurking somewhere in the background, probably listening, arms crossed, face skeptical. That first hit of resistance caught me off guard, but I tried to stay calm. I went on, trying to frame it as helpful. Since you guys don't have a mortgage anymore and the house is getting a bit old, maybe you could sell this place and move somewhere smaller. I could even help with it, I said gently, hoping they'd see the logic, the potential for improvement. But, the moment I mentioned it, the room changed. Dad muted the TV like he'd just been snapped out of a trance. My mom's tone sharpened instantly. And then, Jessica, who had apparently been eavesdropping, shrieked from her room. I can't believe you, she yelled, face red, practically vibrating with fury. You finally get a little money and now you want to kick us out. You want to get rid of us. I was genuinely taken aback. I mean, come on. I thought this was helpful, a way to improve everyone's situation. I tried to explain. I'm not trying to push anyone out. I just thought it could make things easier for all of us, I said, carefully, trying not to escalate things. But my words fell flat. My dad's response was low and cold. Your situation seems pretty improved already, he said, voice clipped. And suddenly, the atmosphere wasn't about the house anymore. It was about me, about my success, about the audacity of having something of my own. It was wild, watching the reaction shift so fast. My parents, the people I'd supported quietly for years, were suddenly bristling with entitlement, as if my achievements were a personal affront. And Jessica, standing there in her room, was like a storm contained in a teenager's frame, angry and loud, feeling as though she had been robbed of some invisible birthright. I couldn't understand it. All I wanted was to share my good fortune, to make life easier for everyone. And instead, it was met with shock, resistance, and almost theatrical outrage. I tried to reason with them. I reminded Jessica that she was an adult, that she could find her own place, that I could even help with the deposit if she wanted. But she wasn't having it. The shrieks and accusations flew. I was trying to get rid of them, take their security, make them homeless. I was dumbfounded. I kept repeating myself, trying to emphasize that I was offering help, not forcing a decision. But the tension in the room was thick, almost palpable. The lines were drawn, and it was clear that no amount of logic or goodwill would sway the immediate anger. Leaving that night, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. Excitement because I had a place of my own, a sanctuary built from my hard work. Dread because the joy of that milestone was completely overshadowed by the bitterness and resentment in the house I grew up in. I realized, maybe for the first time, that my family didn't just resist my success, they felt entitled to it. And that sense of entitlement, that shadow of jealousy and perceived injustice, was going to be a constant, looming presence in the chapters ahead. In that moment, I also realized something else. My home wasn't just a house. It was a symbol, my independence, my security, the life I had built from scratch. And while I wanted to share it, I had to accept that not everyone could celebrate with me. The drama, the resistance, the disbelief, it wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about recognition, respect, and the inability of some people to reconcile someone else's success with their own narrative. And honestly, that tension, that simmering resentment, was just the beginning of a conflict I hadn't fully imagined yet. At first, the requests started subtly, almost innocently. My mom would call, voice heavy with concern, talking about the refrigerator. "Julie, I just don't know what we're going to do. The old one's giving out and your father's paycheck is already stretched so thin this month." Her tone was soft, almost pleading. I sighed, recognizing the story. A few years ago, this might have been a genuine crisis. Now, though, it felt different, calculated. A test, maybe, to see if I would cave. I ordered the top-of-the-line model online and had it delivered the next day. The thanks. A brief text. "It's here." Just that. Nothing more. Then came the car. My dad called, voice low, heavy with an almost theatrical defeat. "The car's making a funny noise. Took it to the shop. They say the whole front axle needs replacement. I guess we'll just let it sit." I couldn't believe it. I knew the estimate was high, but that wasn't even the point anymore. I transferred the money. Again. But inside, a spark of irritation was starting to flicker. It wasn't that I minded helping, really. I didn't, but it was the repetition, the pattern, the way these requests were wrapped in urgency and helplessness, yet somehow still carefully framed as inevitabilities. And then there was Jessica. Her requests were bolder, more entitled. Over the phone, she casually announced, "Julie, I really need a new laptop for my influencing. My old one is so slow. It's impossible to edit my videos. It's really holding my career back." I knew full well that her editing mostly involved applying filters on her phone, but I still tried to be the peacemaker. I sent her the MacBook, thinking, fine, this is a small thing I can do to smooth the waters. 2 days later, she posts a photo of herself on some beach resort trip, captioned, "Treating myself, hash boss babe." No MacBook in sight, just proof that she was using my generosity for personal indulgence. And it stung. By this point, I started noticing a pattern. Every request followed by a subtle or not so subtle manipulation. The refrigerator, the car, Jessica's laptop. Each item framed as a necessity, each plea backed by emotional urgency, yet always benefiting them in ways that didn't align with the story they were telling me. I realized, slowly but surely, that my generosity was being exploited, that it wasn't just about helping. It was about expectation, control, testing boundaries I hadn't even set clearly yet. The tipping point came when they turned their sights on my house. Mom called, syrupy sweet, almost theatrical. "Julie, your father and I were talking. This old house is just too much for us to maintain. And with Jessica needing space for her brand, we thought maybe it makes sense for us to move in with you. We could sell this place, have a nice nest egg, all be together. I mean, you could even let us help around the house." I was stunned, speechless. They didn't want to visit for dinner. They wanted to move in and take over my sanctuary. My voice tightened. "No," I said, firmer than I intended. "Absolutely not." The sweetness vanished immediately. "What do you mean, no, after everything we've done for you, everything you've done for me?" My mom's voice cracked, angry and incredulous. I could hear Jessica's shrill exclamations in the background, my dad's voice low and defensive. It was like a play, a well-rehearsed drama, and I was suddenly cast as the villain. Their entitlement was raw, unmasked. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were demanding pieces of my life, my choices, my space. And in that moment, I finally saw it. This wasn't about need. It was about control, about taking what they felt they were owed, regardless of the cost to me. My hands shook a little as I hung up the phone. The realization hit hard. My generosity, my patience, my desire to help had been weaponized. I couldn't let it continue. That's when I understood I needed boundaries, real ones, firm and non-negotiable. No more automatic yeses, no more bending over backward to preserve peace at my own expense. This wasn't just about money or material things anymore. It was about protecting my life, my home, my autonomy. The slow, insidious manipulation of my family had become clear, and I knew I had to respond with clarity and strength. And honestly, I was angry. Angry in a way that was sharp, focused, and justified. It was a normal Tuesday, or at least it felt normal. I had just come home from a long day at the office, looking forward to a quiet evening in my own space. I was unlocking my front door when this man in a plain sedan pulled up across the street. He got out, envelope in hand, walked straight toward me, and asked, "Are you Julie?" My gut tightened. There was something in his voice, flat and professional, that immediately set off alarm bells. "Yes," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer. He just handed me a large manila envelope. "You've been served," he said, then turned and walked back to his car. My heart stopped. Wait, served what my mind raced? I had no business disputes. I didn't owe anyone anything. And then I realized this wasn't ordinary legal stuff. I held the envelope, frozen, feeling its weight like it was pressing into my chest. My hands were shaking as I tore it open, pulling out a thick stack of papers. And there it was. The top sheet bore the official seal of the county court and the words, "My parents and Jessica, plaintiffs, me, defendant, Julie." I sank down onto my front steps, disbelief hitting me like a ton of bricks. My own parents, my own sister, were suing me, rereading the names over and over. I kept thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that somehow this was a mistake. But no, the words were clear, bold, real. I forced myself to read the complaint, though my mind kept spinning. And the claims, oh my God, they were absurd, ridiculous. I had supposedly built my entire business based on an implicit family agreement, using ideas supposedly inspired by Jessica's innate understanding of modern trends. They demanded 50% ownership of my company. 50%? Retroactive payment of half of all profits since the business became profitable. And then the lien on my house that I had bought, paid for, and lived in. They were trying to take it all. I sat there on the steps, staring at the papers, my brain struggling to process it. How could this be happening? My parents, the people I'd supported, the people I'd given so much to were suddenly opponents in a legal battle that made no sense. The more I read, the more ridiculous the claims seemed, but the more the anger started to rise. First shock, then hurt, then pure burning anger. How dare they? How dare they try to rewrite history, to claim my life, my work, my sacrifices as if they belonged to someone else. It wasn't just about the money, it was everything. The long nights, the ramen dinners, the years of juggling college and clients, every cold email, every pitch, every small victory painstakingly earned now being claimed as theirs. The part about Jessica inspiring my ideas made me want to laugh. If it weren't so infuriating, the so-called genius contribution of my sister asking me to fix her Wi-Fi password. And they were trying to spin that into ownership of my life's work. I sat there until the sun started to set, the sky deepening into purple. Streetlights flickered on, shadows stretching across my lawn. My mind was racing, my hands still trembling from holding the papers. I realized I couldn't let this slide. They expected me to crumble, to be the quiet, accommodating Julie, the one who would settle just to avoid conflict. They didn't know me at all. I stood up slowly, clutching the envelope. Cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was an attempt to erase me, to rewrite my life, to punish me for daring to succeed. And I wasn't going to let them. My mind shifted from hurt to determination. I had spent years building something from scratch, and no one was going to take that away. I walked inside, took a deep breath, and looked up the number for the best litigation attorney I could find in the city. This wasn't something I could handle alone. I needed someone ruthless, someone brilliant, someone who could dismantle their claims piece by piece. I remember thinking, right now, I need fire. I need strategy. I need someone who won't flinch at the absurdity of their claims. By the next morning, I was sitting in the sleek, polished offices of Vance and Associates. Top floor, panoramic views. That smell of old books mixed with fresh coffee, the kind of place that oozes control and power. Arthur Vance stood to greet me. Firm handshake, sharp eyes, perfectly tailored suit, calm and unshaken. And for the first time since I opened that envelope, I felt like I might have a chance. I slid the lawsuit across the massive mahogany desk. My parents and my sister are suing me, I said flatly, my voice betraying the raw mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. For 10 minutes, Arthur read every single page in silence, not a flinch, not a single hint of surprise. I watched his face, trying to see how he was taking it in, but he remained perfectly neutral, which somehow made the situation even more surreal. Finally, he put on his glasses and leaned back. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his mouth. "This is certainly ambitious of them," he said, and I felt it, that shift from numb disbelief to fierce resolve, solidifying. I was going to fight. I wasn't giving them a penny they hadn't already been gifted. I wasn't giving up a share of my company, my house, my life. The shock, the hurt, the ridiculousness of their claims, it all turned into focus. The war had begun, and I was ready. Meeting Arthur Vance for the first time felt intense. The kind of intensity that makes your stomach twist a little, but also gives you hope. The office was huge, sleek, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city below. Everything about it screamed control and precision, exactly what I needed. I sat down across from him and pushed the lawsuit toward him, my hands a little shaky. "My parents and my sister are suing me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded calmly, adjusting his glasses, and started reading. 10 minutes of silence stretched like an eternity while he scanned every page, his expression neutral, almost unreadable. And I realized then that whatever storm was coming, I wasn't facing it alone. Once he finished, he leaned back and gave a small, knowing smile. "This is ambitious of them," he said. I laughed nervously. Ambitious, that felt like an understatement. He asked me a simple question: were we going to settle? Or fight, I said without hesitation. The word felt good, solid, like I was reclaiming a piece of myself that had been threatened. Arthur outlined the plan. Phase 1 was discovery. We needed to show, clearly, that their claims were not only false, but preposterous. Every email, every receipt, every bank statement from the early days of Amplified Digital, everything that proved I built this from scratch, that I managed every client, every project, every little success on my own had to be gathered. And then, the evidence of my generosity toward my family. The spreadsheet listing every dollar I'd ever given them, from groceries to bills to the MacBook for Jessica, dates, reasons, context, everything. Documented to show that their claims of entitlement were nothing more than a pattern of manipulation. Over the next few weeks, my life became a blur of digging through the past. I felt like an archaeologist sifting through layers of my own history. College transcripts, old emails to potential clients, invoices for my first projects. Thank you notes from those early businesses, they all went into one massive folder. Each piece of evidence felt like another brick in the fortress we were building around me. Proof against the fantasy they were trying to sell in court. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally. I kept replaying every interaction with my family, every small kindness I'd extended, wondering how it had all twisted into this bizarre legal battle. Arthur and his team got to work, filing our formal response. They denied every allegation in the strongest terms, and then went on the offensive with a countersuit. Fraud, attempted extortion, legal fees I was forced to incur, all designed to put my family on the defensive. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. They weren't the plaintiffs with moral high ground. Now they had to answer questions under oath, justify their pattern of requests, and confront the truth of their manipulation. Preparing for my own deposition was brutal. Arthur played the part of their lawyer, relentless in his questioning, trying to find holes in my story. Hours of scrutiny, every detail dissected. Why hadn't I discussed my business with my family? Why did I give them so much money if I felt no obligation? Isn't it true that my sister was the creative one and I was not? It was exhausting, yes, but it also sharpened me. Stripped away the emotion, left only facts. I realized that clarity and preparation were my weapons. My resolve grew with each session, the anger solidifying into focus. This was not just about money, it was about truth, about defending the life I had built with my own hands. Looking back, the preparation phase was both brutal and empowering. I'd spent years quietly building my independence, and now every piece of that work, every record of effort, generosity, and perseverance became part of the defense. The strategy wasn't just reactive, it was proactive. We weren't just protecting myself, we were dismantling their claims methodically, showing the court that their version of events was a fiction. And through it all, my mindset shifted. I wasn't just the defendant, I was a strategist, a protector of my life, and finally, someone who understood the full weight of the battle ahead. The day of the hearing arrived, overcast and gray, matching the knot in my stomach perfectly. Walking into the courtroom, I felt smaller than I'd imagined. It was sterile, smelled of floor polish and old paper, with fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. I sat beside Arthur at the defendant's table, hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, my family was there. The three people who had once been my safe space, now my opponents. My dad looked awkward and stiff, ill-fitting suit and all. My mom sat rigid, Sunday best pressed, face a practiced mask of innocence. Jessica, as usual, wore the trendiest outfit she could find, smirk barely hiding her disbelief like she was the star of her own reality show. They wouldn't look at me, and honestly, that hurt more than I expected. Their lawyer went first, a slick man named Peterson. He spun this story of a loving, supportive family, how they'd invested emotionally and conceptually in their youngest daughter, only to be cast aside. He spoke in grand terms: trust, understanding, familial duty, creative genius. I kept my hands clenched under the table, biting back the urge to roll my eyes. None of it reflected reality. It was like watching a movie about a family I didn't know. Then Arthur stood up. He walked to the lectern with quiet confidence. Nothing flashy, just solid, undeniable presence. He didn't yell. He didn't use dramatic pauses. He just laid it out, cold facts, one by one. "Your Honor," he began, voice calm but commanding. "What we have here is not a legitimate claim. This is a work of fiction, an after-the-fact attempt to claim the fruits of one young woman's labor." He pulled out the business registration documents, showing the founding date. My name as the sole owner at 19. College transcripts came next, showing I had juggled full-time studies while building clients. He presented affidavits from my first clients, including the bakery owner, who testified that they had only ever worked with me and had been amazed by my dedication. I felt a flicker of pride amidst the nerves. Then came Jessica. Arthur flipped through a thick binder. The plaintiff claims Jessica's innate understanding of modern trends inspired the business. Let's look at the record. He showed screenshots of her social media accounts over the past 3 years, stagnant follower counts, low engagement rates. Then he pulled up posts showing her beach trips, sponsored teas, other frivolous content, including a photo 2 days after I sent her the laptop. There it was, clear as day. My stomach twisted as I watched the color drain from her face, the smugness melting into blotchy red embarrassment. My mom's glare was sharp and hateful, my dad shrinking further into his chair. It was almost surreal, seeing the truth hit them. Arthur didn't stop there. He moved to the financials. He presented the spreadsheet of every dollar I'd ever given them the mortgage. The refrigerator, car repairs, the MacBook. Dates, amounts, context, every transaction accounted for. And then he paused, letting the courtroom feel the weight. He explained the pattern every time I said no. Every time I refused further demands, they escalated, culminating in this lawsuit. It wasn't about family. It was an attempt at extortion, plain and simple. I could feel the tension in the room, thick, almost tangible. Their lawyer's face tightened, my family's posture stiffened. Every detail dismantled their narrative. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, had been listening intently. When Peterson tried to interject, she cut him off sharply. "That's enough," she said. She addressed the plaintiffs directly. "You've presented feelings, not facts. Entitlement, not evidence. You should be proud of your daughter's accomplishments, not dragging her into court with a baseless lawsuit." The room was silent. I could barely breathe, waiting for her next words. Then she delivered the blow. The motion to dismiss was granted with prejudice. No further claims allowed. Not only that, but she ruled in favor of my countersuit, ordering my parents and Jessica to cover all my legal fees. Relief crashed over me in waves, followed immediately by a surge of triumph. I'd done it. The weight of their attack lifted in an instant. I glanced at Arthur, whose calm expression betrayed a faint, satisfied smile. I wanted to laugh, cry, and just scream all at once. Jessica burst into tears, muffled sobs that filled the room. My mother's eyes were pure, unadulterated hatred. My dad just looked down, defeated. It was jarring, surreal, a victory that carried with it a strange sorrow. I'd won, yes, but the family I had known, the safe harbor I thought existed, was gone. Reality hit me hard. I had defended my life, my work, my home, but at the cost of those relationships. And yet, beneath it all, a cold, clean sense of justice settled over me. I had not only protected myself, but exposed the truth. As the gavel came down, echoing through the courtroom, it was like a reset. My life, my work, my space, it was mine, fully, without interference. Walking out, the gray sky broke slightly, a sliver of sunlight cutting through the clouds. Arthur walked beside me, briefcase in hand, and said genuinely, "Congratulations, Julie. You stood your ground. You were brave." I nodded, voice thick, emotion catching in my throat. "Thank you, Arthur. I couldn't have done it without you." He shrugged lightly. "You did the hard part. You lived it. Now you get to live the rest on your own terms." For the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of peace, of freedom, and of finally being fully in control of my life. Julie's victory in court marked the start of a new chapter. Though she lost her family, she gained peace, independence, and a life fully her own, surrounded by a chosen family of friends, her supportive team, and her dream home. She's built a life grounded in strength and resilience. It's proof that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most meaningful freedom. If her story resonated with you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or subscribe for more stories about courage and perseverance.